Hey guys, it's me, Dr. Reed. In this video, we're going to be looking at the respiratory system. Last week, we looked at the cardiovascular system, and we talked about circulation. So let's just remind ourselves how circulation works, right? So if I have my heart is divided into 4 chambers. I have my right atrium, my right ventricle, left atrium, left ventricle. Blood is going to come in from that body via the vena cava into that right atrium, fill that right atrium, and then from there, it's going to go through or down when we have atrial systole. It will be pushed into the right ventricle through the tricuspid valve or my right AV valve. And then when we have ventricular systole, this will then be pushed into our pulmonary circuit. Which is our lungs. And that is one of the main contenders we're talking about today, right? And then after it goes there, so it goes through the pulmonary arteries, and then it comes back in and fills and goes to the body. Go back to cardiovascular if you don't remember all those other parts, but I just wanted to show you that this is where we're talking about. Okay. So, respiratory system, breathing. And we talked about a few muscles in the past that are responsible for breathing, right? We talked about our intercostals. We had our external intercostals. We had our internal intercostals. And we're going to add one more, which is the diaphragm. Now, the diaphragm is located right here on the bottom. And that diaphragm is, when it goes down, it helps to expand the lungs. It's due to a force, and in physiology, you'll learn kind of the force, but the force of pulling down is actually going to inflate the lungs themselves. And in physiology, you can do some cool experiments looking at that. But we are in anatomy, so in anatomy, we're mostly labeling things. So when we start, we breathe in. We can breathe in through our nose. So this is our nasal region. Or we can breathe through our mouth or our oral cavity. So that's where air starts. Then our air is going to be sent down to our trachea. It's going to be sent down. We have our larynx kind of in the back right here. Let me do those in different colors. So we have our pharynx, which I'll do in yellow. So we have our pharynx in the back right here, our larynx, and then from our larynx we go into our trachea. And our trachea will reach the bottom and it'll split into what are our primary bronchi. Our primary bronchi are also known as our main bronchi. So that's kind of the first place we go. And we go from those bronchi, those primary bronchi, into the lungs themselves. The right lung is on the right side of the body, and the left lung is on the left. And they actually are different. So your right lung is different from your left lung. The reason why the left lung is a little different is the heart kind of pushes itself more into that left side. So that's why we see that the left lung does have a little less than what we see on the right lung. You are responsible for knowing what stuff is found on the right lung and what is found on the left lung. And in lab, you'll be labeling right lung and left lung diagrams. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So then we get into our lungs. And from inside of our lungs, and I did my best to kind of show this, but we go from our primary or main bronchi, see what other colors I got, to our secondary. And from our secondary, then we have our tertiary bronchi. Here are my tertiary bronchi. And then from my tertiary bronchi, I go into my respiratory bronchioles that are going to end up bringing me to my alveoli. So if I were to kind of like zoom in here, if we zoom in on this little tiny spot, this is actually then extending down to these various little sacs They're usually drawn kind of like this. And they have these rounded areas because it increases surface area, so it allows a lot of exchange. And when you zoom in on these areas, we find these called pneumocytes. Pneumocytes are the functional cells in the lungs. We have type 1, and we have a type 2. And they're going to be responsible for different things inside this region, which we call these the alveoli. I think I misspelled that. Alveoli. I think there's an L in there. And that's what we're seeing there. Maybe I'll give it a new color. I feel like I've used all the colors. We'll do them in red. So there we have our alveoli, and that is going to help create our respiratory membrane. So our respiratory membrane is the area where we have gas exchange. And the layers that we see for our respiratory, when we're looking at our respiratory membrane, if I kind of draw it in, I started drawing it this way, but I'm actually going to change it up and draw it this way. So this is going to be where that circulation happens. So we have two different areas. We have our alveoli. There is an L there. It's A-L-V. Alveoli. Or we'll do alveolus because we're looking at one. Alveolus is one of them. So we have our alveoli on one side. We have our interstitial space in the middle. And then we have our capillary. So those are kind of our three distinctions. Now, we'll start with our capillary. Our capillary has a basement membrane. And then it has endothelium. Remember those endothelial cells? Those are just going to be one single, when we're talking about endothelium, endothelium is a simple squamous membrane. And that's what we're seeing here. I'll put the little nuclei there. That purple does not look good there. We'll do them in black. Okay, so that's my endothelium. So that is what we're looking at there. That's our capillary endothelium. So our red blood cells, right? Our blood cells are coming in over here. And they are looking for oxygen. Ooh, that's a big color in. They are in here looking for oxygen. That's really what they want. And right now they don't have any. So where are they going to get it? Well, they're going to get it from the alveoli. So if we go on the alveoli side, we start with the epithelial basement membrane. I'm going to do it in this. So here's the basement membrane for this one. Then we have our alveolar epithelium. That is going to have some of our pneumocytes and things like that in it. I want a different color. So in this, we're going to have our epithelial cells, but we're also going to have some pneumocytes. And our various pneumocytes are going to, one of the types is going to create a mucus layer or a fluid layer that help moisten the lungs. And the thing that it creates is called surfactant. We need to have moisture in order to have oxygen exchange. And so then we have air come in, and air is going to go here. And then CO2 is going to go out. Specifically, our carbon. That's how we're going to get rid of that carbon. So they kind of do this little exchange. That's happening. That is our respiratory layer. Now, when we look at our pneumocytes, so I told you that one of them is creating our surfactant, and the other one is just helping with lining this system. So the one that's creating, I'll kind of add it in green. The ones that are creating surfactant are our type 2. Our type 1 are what create the actual lining. The epithelial cells that are creating the actual lining. So type 1, line. Type 2, create surfactant. And that's our alveoli. Now, if we look specifically at the lungs, and we can kind of divide the lungs, there's a few, and again, in lab, we're going to get into like a little bit more detail. But if I were to draw the lungs, so right, we had our trachea, and then our bronchi, they kind of come out, they do all of that. But let's just focus on the lungs themselves. So on the right side, we'll start with the right. I'm going to have 3 lobes. I have a superior lobe, I have a middle lobe, and I have an inferior lobe. So I have a superior, that's the top of the lung. I have a middle, whoops, that's not my color in one. I have a middle, oops, and then I have a lower or inferior. Now, we said that there were a couple of different types of bronchi. My primary bronchi are what enter into the lungs. So that's what I already drew. Our secondary bronchi, the next row of bronchi, are also known as our lobar bronchi. So our primary is also known as our main. And then our secondary, we have ones that go here, one that's going to come here, and then one that's going to come down to here. Those secondary bronchi are also known as lobar. So they're bringing it to the lobes. And then from there, our tertiary are known as segmental because they segment out from that within the lobe. Now, if we talk about, there's a few fissures that you need to know. Fissures are what separate one lobe from the other. So the fissure that separates the superior from the middle lobe, this fissure right here, is known as the horizontal fissure. The fissure that separates the middle from the inferior, I never labeled this one, lobe, is known as our oblique fissure. Now, when I look at my left lung, it's shaped a little differently. I didn't do too good of a job drawing it because I got this little kind of like tail on the end. There we go. That's a little better. Now, this shouldn't be as small. We'll do it one more time. We'll see if I got it this time. A little better. This looks a little deflated. There we go. That looks way better. Okay. Now they're kind of equal. So it's not like it's much smaller, but it is shaped a little differently. So what we see with the left lung is there are only 2 lobes in the left lung. So we also have an oblique fissure here. But we do not have a horizontal fissure on the left side. We still have a superior lobe. And we have an inferior lobe, but we do not have a middle lobe. But there is this little special part of our inferior lobe, and that is called the lingula. And it's kind of this like little snippet at the bottom that we only have here. The other thing that we have on this side, and you see it, I kind of drew it right here, is the cardiac notch, which is where the heart kind of notches into where the lung is. And there's that inferior. And on this side, so here's a common question. How many lobar bronchi do I have in my right lung? 1, 2, 3, because there's 3 lobes. How many lobar bronchi do I have in my left lung? 1, 2, because there's 2 lobes. How many primary do I have in my right? 1. How many primary do I have in my left? 1. Now, the other view that we can look at the lungs, I mean, we can look in the front. This is from the front. We can also look from the side, and we can see this here. So here you can kind of see there's that left lung. You can kind of see the different shapes. Now, see how they're not necessarily one's bigger or one's smaller. What you really see here is those 3 different lobes versus 2 lobes on the left. But this is the area that I want to talk about. So this is our hilar region. This is where our hilum is where we have the entrance into the lungs. Now there are a bunch of vessels here, and now it's really complicated looking at a cadaver. Let me kind of draw out. It's going to be a little different on each side. Not drastically different, but a little different. So on my right lung, so if I were to draw the hilum region, it kind of looks like an ice cream cone. Now some of the main things that we see. So I'm going to do in blue, because blue is deoxygenated. We're going to see our right pulmonary artery. Because remember, the pulmonary arteries are carrying deoxygenated blood. The other thing is we're going to have our right side of our pulmonary veins that are coming out. Now, there are 2 of them. If you think about when we were back in the heart models, right, we had 2 of those pulmonary veins coming back in, whereas we only had 1 artery going through, right, going out. So that we have a superior and inferior pulmonary vein. And those are now carrying oxygenated blood. So they're kind of right underneath that, kind of over to the side and below it. Right next to my pulmonary artery, I'll do this in black, is going to be our bronchus. So that is where we enter in. And that's kind of the arrangement that you'll see when it comes to the hilum of the lungs. When that's on the right side, so this is the right. When we look at the left lung, fairly similar. But the only real difference when we look at them is just that my artery is going to be a little bit more. So if I write a doop-a-doop, you'll see this here. Our artery is going to be a little bit, and you can kind of see here. This right here versus over here, right? That's a vein. And then here we have a vein right there and a vein right here. This is our bronchi. Now this was a deeper cut, so these are our lobar bronchi. See, one's going into this one, one's going into this one. That's why they have those all lined up there. So this was a different cut of how they went into it. But so what I was basically saying is that our artery and our veins are going to be a little different. So we're actually going to have some vein, up there and up side here. We're still going to have our artery, but it's going to be lower, and our bronchi is usually more to the side. Oh, did I do the veins? I did the artery in red. There we go. Fairly similar though. Don't worry too much about this part because you guys aren't identifying on models per se, but just an idea. But this area, this region is called the hilum. Both sides have a hilum. So those are the main things that we're going to be looking at when it comes to the respiratory system. If you have any questions, let me know, and I